Hello, and welcome to our first Culture Pioneers conversation of the season. My name is Becky Norman. I'm the managing editor of HR Zone and one of the co-creators of Culture Pioneers. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Bruce Daisley to chat about what's coming in workplace culture in 2025. Bruce has been regarded as one of the most respected thought leaders on the subject of workplace culture and the future of work. His prior business career saw him spend over a decade running Twitter in Europe and previously YouTube in the UK. And following the remarkable success of his debut book, The Joy of Work, which reached #1 in the Sunday Times charts, in 2022, his second bestseller, Fortitude, was described by the Financial Times as the best business book in the year. Bruce has spent the last few years turning his passion for workplace culture into an expertise. His award-winning podcast, Eat, Sleep, Work, Repeat, has topped the business charts and has been listened to over 6 million times. Bruce, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Thanks for having me.
So for this conversation, I've pulled together a couple of key trends and priorities that have been posed by various tech vendors, research bodies, and thought leaders in the space to get your thoughts on, essentially.
Let's go.
So I've got 5 to run through. The first key trend is that performance measurement shifts from me to we. And this one is from CultureAmp, who recently published their five key trends for 2025, or predictions rather. So they say that organisations are scrambling to define and create a high performance culture, but this tends to historically hinge on individual high performance, which, as it turns out, is really, really difficult to achieve. I was actually on a webinar with them yesterday, and they shared some data that showed only 2% of people are able to retain that high performance level twice in a row during a 3-year period. So it's unsustainable, essentially. So in 2025, we're going to see a broadening of performance measurement to the team level, and individual performance measurement won't go away, but is more considered through that team lens. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I've worked in environments where there's been team targets or team goals, and I've worked in environments where there's been individual goals, and it's definitely the case that when you work in an environment that's got a collective goal, a team goal, it produces more cohesion, it produces more collective energy, and just some of the things that we associate with strong team performance. Cooperation, supporting each other, generally are enhanced by the team environment. Obviously, the other consideration we've got at the moment right now, though, is that a lot of people are realizing that if they're going to make the best of flexible working, of hybrid working, then they do need some accountability to individuals. They do need to hold individuals to an expectation, like they got to set them definable goals. So I think it illustrates the challenge of this. I chatted to someone who focused on the incentives work of trying to get these things right, and he said that quite often individual goals do end up causing unexpected behaviors, unexpected consequences, and if we're going to try and get this right, then focusing on group goals is more effective. But it shows how complicated this is. Look, broadly, the best practice we've got with regards to managing flexible working is there does need to be some individual metrics of performance. So I guess I've given an and rather than an either or as my answer there.
Yeah.
Just demonstrates how complicated it is, really.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's good to have those team goals that are aligned with your organization's overarching goals, but you also need to have individual accountability, because if someone's maybe not achieving their part as a team, they're not maybe being a team player, then the whole team can't be held to account for that.
Yeah, that's right. And quite often when you look at team performance, I've been studying this year, I've been studying sort of team cohesion, what makes teams bond together. And generally what you find is there's a lot of common sense in that. But one of the things that we do recognize, and we probably know from our own experience, is that when you've got a low performer in the team, actually the rest of the team is waiting for the boss to sort it out. If someone isn't pulling their weight, the boss generally is expected by everyone else to fix it. We're all working hard here. One person's slacking. Can you sort this out? So it does reflect something that's our own experience, that people in a team generally do want the leader to address the thing that is all quite obvious to them.
The second key trend, this one's more of a priority, is from Gartner HR's top 5 priorities for 2025, which was published at the end of last year. And they said a priority is to embed culture in organisational values to activate accountability, kind of what we were talking about a minute ago. So 57% of HR leaders agree that managers fail to enforce the desired vision of culture within their teams. So essentially they're saying we need managers to take greater accountability for activating the desired culture through their everyday actions, behaviours and decisions. I mean, this seems sensible. You're not going to change a culture or sustain a good culture if your managers aren't bought into it and they're not living and breathing it. Yeah, any thoughts?
Yeah, one definition that I use of culture that is quite helpful, and it sort of focuses the mind on this, is culture is the behavior inside an organization, whether it's rewarded, encouraged, or tolerated. And it's often that tolerated part that really helps you, I think, recognize some of the challenges. We've talked in the previous answer about what's rewarded, those incentives, those encourage, creating sort of metrics, but it's often the stuff that's tolerated that makes the biggest difference. And principally in a lot of organizations, this is because you've got either high status people or high people with high levels of position power, like maybe they're really talented. There's a tolerance for them not necessarily doing what is regarded as culturally normal. And this is the big question that we've got. So if you're going to try and embed a culture inside an organization, then trying to be consistent about, yes, the targets, the incentives, the rewards, but also making sure that if people do things that are countercultural, they are held accountable for it. They are held responsible for it. So that might be, these patterns of behavior that maybe people don't turn up for meetings, or they don't abide by the rules, or they don't get their reporting by the end of the week. Whatever it is, it's normally the high performance people we tolerate on that. And just trying to be consistent is probably the most important lesson, I think, for organizations.
Yeah, and possibly it's also you're going to need managers that are equipped to deal with those people as well. So if they are struggling with someone that is, problematic, their behavior or what they're doing is problematic, then perhaps your managers, if they're not confronting it, they're lacking the skills to do so or the
Yeah,
confidence to do
absolutely.
so.
But one of the challenges of early management is that we often want to be popular, and so a manager doesn't necessarily want to risk unpopularity or saying difficult things. And so, look, it follows from that managers almost certainly won't tackle these high status or talented people. They won't tackle them because there's a fear that, wow, if I pull them up on this, maybe they'll leave, or maybe they'll be unhappy with me. So yeah, look, the onus, it's never been harder to be a manager, a middle manager, but yeah, absolutely, the responsibility does fall on them, and it's a tough learning lesson.
Absolutely. Okay, so on to our third trend. This one's from Mercer HR, and they say that in 2025, there will be a greater focus on multi-generational engagement and accommodating the needs of employees across 5 different generations. Now, I get probably a new research study fall into my inbox on a daily basis claiming Gen Z are uncommitted to work, Gen Z lack these skills, but they're ahead in AI, Gen Z hate the office, and now I think I got an email in my inbox yesterday saying a new study says 78% of Gen Z workers romanticize their office on social media or find printers charming. So yeah, I get a lot about different generations and what they're doing. Is this helpful for us to use generational stereotypes, do you think?
Yeah, I share your feeling that, look, sometimes there's an attempt to try and turn something into a trend that maybe has always been the case. I think workers at the age of 21, 22 to 23 have always thought, I'm going to do this job for a year, 2 years and see what else comes along. Or they see friends and former colleagues who've switched jobs and think, oh, that's the quickest way to get a promotion or get a pay rise. And I think that's always been the case. So I am a bit skeptical about this generation blaming that often comes around. Look, I think what is helpful is to take a pause and to reflect on why starting work now might be different to starting work 10 years ago. And I think, to my mind, that's less necessarily about um, generational differences between different cohorts and more about the reality of joining work right now. What we've seen is that a lot of people don't necessarily recognize. I was chatting to a group of leaders last week that the minimum wage in the UK is £21,500. And that's relevant because a lot of organizations who maybe are asking for people to come into the office 3 or 4 days a week aren't paying a whole lot more than that. And there's one thing living in Watford, working for McDonald's on the minimum wage and walking to work. And there's another earning a little bit more than that, but being expected to go into central London or central Manchester or central wherever you're from every day, that I don't think the bosses have necessarily recognized that the world of work is just a lot harder now. If someone asks you to go into the office, quite often, the website Spare Room says that there isn't a single postcode in London that's affordable on a starter salary. So that means someone's probably got an hour's journey into the office. That's probably costing them £12 to £15 to get in. And so as a result, the realities of modern work are probably a lot harder. So I err on the side of not necessarily generational blaming or saying that Gen Z are different to millennials by any substance, but rather actually just the whole of work's a lot harder now. Quite often you hear managers romanticize, oh, in my day, we'd all do this. We'd come into the office every day. We'd go to the pub. Well, look, let's think practically. If you're a Gen Z worker and you get lumped with the chance of buying a round of drinks, that's probably £40 out of your wallet. And not a lot of people have got the money to get a train and £40 worth of drinks. Work is definitely a lot more, life is a lot more expensive now. Work is a lot harder. So I tend to hesitate from the generational blame that comes with some of this. But I do think circumstances are different. And that's probably the big difference that I notice.
So our fourth trend is a prediction from Gethin Nadin, Chief Innovation Officer at Benefex, and this was published in our own predictions piece on HR Zone. And he said that the 4-day work week will continue to build substantial support in 2025. Now, obviously, we had the UK government's proposals on a right to request 4-day work weeks last year, got a lot of media attention. And there's been a growing body of evidence in showing that the 4-day work week enhances productivity and performance. But on the flip side, we've also got the 2024 trend of the return to office mandates and organisations trying to assert more control on employees. How do you think this is going to pan out in the year ahead?
I've seen union leaders say that time is the new money. And I think there's a good deal of truth to that. One of the things that's been advertised to me in the course of the last couple of weeks is some jobs in local authorities. Like local authorities have struggled because of pay freezes, because of sort of challenges from central government grants haven't gone up. They've struggled to keep pace with the wage inflation that's happened elsewhere. And one of the things that we are seeing, Cambridge County Council made an application to do this. One of the things we have seen is that jobs that maybe can't afford to pay a market rate are looking at other variables. Time is the new money. And so they've been looking, saying, can we offer this as a 4-day week? Very appealing, bigger cohort of people, maybe people who are less focused on money could do a job as a 4-day week. So I definitely see that as we're starting to get some degree of separation and segmentation, that some jobs now are fully back in the office 5 days a week. Other jobs, like as we're discussing here, might be in councils 4 days a week. So we are getting a separation of what jobs offer in a way that even 5-10 years ago we didn't see. So I think there will be a move to that. One of the things that came out of the pretty extensive trial of the 4-day week was that organizations who did it said it's not easy to just switch to 4 days. You have to reorganize work. The amount of meetings you have is probably sustainable in a 5-day week, but not sustainable in a 4-day week. You need to get the work done. And so one of the things that they also mentioned is work intensity goes up. So you've got 4 intense days. Really interesting if you go into the 4-day week trials. Some jobs that weren't necessarily office jobs, but maybe retail or in hospitality, a lot of the people who were doing a 4-day job there added another job on top of it, which kind of undermines the benefit. I think the notion of a 4-day week is that the cognitive load of 4 days of work is such that you then have the trade-off of more time to recover, to energize, to beat burnout. But what they witnessed in some of the trials and experiments were that people were doing a 4-day week at one hospitality place and then a 3-day week somewhere else. So effectively they were doing 2 jobs, but their burnout was going up. So look, work intensity is one of the things that we seem to get from it. The other thing that seems to come from 4-day weeks is that work sociability seems to go down. So, I'm firmly of the belief that culture lives in the gaps between things. And if there's no gaps, if there's fewer gaps, then what we might find is that the work culture feels less connected, less cohesive, less energized. But and so it continues the trend to work feeling a bit more transactional. But interesting. I definitely think the dialogue on 4-day weeks is going to go up, almost certainly with non-profit jobs and with government jobs in the short term.
Interesting. Thanks, Bruce. So on to our 5th and final trend. This is another one from Culture Amp, and they say employee and employer tensions are likely to grow in 2025. So they mentioned that employees are increasingly stressed and burnt out, and they're publicly voicing their discontent. Since 2022, they've noticed a rise in negative comments on employee feedback platforms and, on Glassdoor, and you can see the trends on TikTok as well. And this kind of runs in tandem with organizations faced with shrinking budgets, layoffs, restructures, which typically leads to employees having to do more with less. Do you think this kind of employer-employee tension is going to continue into 2025?
Almost certainly. One of the things that we have seen in the course of the last 6 months really is last 12 months, employer herding. So employers sort of copying each other, seeing what each other did and the contagion of that. So the first time we saw it is employer layoffs about this time last year. We saw a lot of firms making redundancies, making job cuts, even if they were reporting good results. There seemed to be a contagion where investors, the market was expecting that there would be job cuts. And so they were all copying each other. That contagion has continued. We saw probably Q4 last year, a lot of discussion about return to office and a feeling that organizations were copying what each other were doing. And right now, there's a concern that contagion, that herding, is going to have an impact on DEI policies. So organizations may be reflecting on scaling back their diversity and inclusion initiatives because maybe there's an expectation of it, maybe there's a trend of doing it, certainly led by America, but we've definitely seen that these things have become politicized. Now, that isn't being matched by a change in employee expectations. Still now, when I work with organizations that have got a very high level of Gen Zs in the workforce, typically right now that's hospitality, that's retail. They've quite often, if you're working in a high street store, typically about half of your employees are under the age of 23, 24. And so what they're witnessing is that those employees are more active, more engaged with politics than ever before. It's not uncommon for them to want to know what the company's policy on Palestine is, what the company's policy on Ukraine is. In fact, I heard one hospitality business who said they wanted to know what the company's policy was on the Southport stabbings. Like, I'm not sure even where to start on something like that. But they've witnessed a lot of employee expectation that the company is expected to do good, because the individual wants to think, I want to work at a place that reflects on me. So there is conflict coming there. This corporate winding down of DEI initiatives and this Gen Z expectation that will be leaning into them. And I suspect there will be a dissonance there. There is going to be bumps in the road, because it might well be that managers freestyle it and say, look, here's my perspective, here's what I think, even if the company is increasingly no longer taking a stance. I sat down with some HR leaders last week, and I said, well, I guess, the visible elements of this are things like Pride Week. Will you have a float at Pride? Will you do any Black History Month initiatives? And actually, I was really inspired. A lot of employers said, we're doubling down on it. We're committed to it. We're here for the long term, and we're not going to be bullied into backing away from these things. But I do expect, as you said there, that there is going to be a bit of a battleground on these things, and no doubt some multinational companies are going to pull back from these initiatives, and that potentially is going to be a pressure point.
And as well, I suppose it'd be interesting to see, are those organisations that are doubling down on those more visible elements, are they doing the deeper stuff as well, and not just because you could be seen to be pride washing if you're not doing other stuff internally and looking at your policies and processes. And I imagine those employees that are coming to them and saying, what's your policy on this? What's your policy on that? They will be wise to that as well.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's right. I mean, there's got to be substance behind having a sort of feather boa on the Pride March. Absolutely, there's got to be more substance to it than that. But I saw that as emblematic of whether they were willing to be on the front foot and out justifying what they're doing. So yeah, no doubt. These we're going to see a big differentiation here, and obviously, like you say, employees are going to expect something substantial. They're not going to expect tokenistic gestures.
Absolutely. Well, that is all of my trends that I wanted to run through. Were there any that you've seen? Obviously, there are tons out there at the moment. Were there any that you've seen, or any kind of trends that you would like to highlight here now?
Yeah, you touched on it right at the start. There's a big question about AI, and one of the things that a lot of employees are witnessing, workers are saying, look, my company doesn't appear to have a strategy on AI. The really interesting thing, I saw some data last week looking at the people who were upskilling in the world of AI, and the vast majority of them, over 80% of them, were doing it on their own time and in their own learning. They felt that their employers were late to this. More often than not, if there's a company policy on AI, you're not allowed to use AI for fear of client confidentiality or using these open models. And so employees are taking things into their own hands. So I definitely think this year is the year that employees are expecting their organizations to get their act together on it. And if they don't, they're going to take it into their own hands and train themselves. So definitely a big trend there. Who knows how it's going to play out? I think, there's definitely the scope that we're witnessing in big organizations. AI is going to be used in the short term to produce efficiencies. I saw at Meta, at Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg said he expected 80% of all code written this year to be written by AI. Clearly, that creates an opportunity for him to downscale his workforce to some extent. And so, if big multinational, colossal organizations, massively profit-making organizations like that, are potentially using AI as an opportunity to make efficiencies, I suspect that's going to be something that's going to have an impact elsewhere in the market. So who knows what's going to happen? I do expect AI is probably going to have a bit more of a material impact rather than just a buzz phrase this year. And and it'll be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I've also heard of this trend of covert AI. So as well as upskilling, using it even though your organization says not to. But then, of course, if your organization's not on the front foot of that, then there could be, ethical misuse of it, or, data issues. So it is important for employers to kind of get ahead with that.
Yeah, bring your own AI is a huge trend. I chatted to someone who works writing code for a big car manufacturer. And I said, "Oh, what do you use?" He said, "Well, we're not allowed to use anything. But obviously, I'd be crazy as a developer right now not to be using AI written code." And so I sit there with it on my browser and it's not approved. That is an incredibly common trend. And so organizations not embracing this doesn't mean employees aren't using it. It just means they're sort of turning a blind eye to it. Big trend, bring your own AI. And I think it demonstrates that there's an expectation from employees to get their act together. Let's get something sorted so we're not just turning a blind eye to what's definitely going on across the workforce.
Yeah. Okay, so I just have one more question for you, and that's I always like to close with a recommendation. So if there was one zero cost change organizations could make to improve their culture and how people feel in their work, what would you recommend that be?
Yeah, for me, I'm obsessed with team cohesion. I'm obsessed with trying to understand what makes us form better teams. The study I've been looking at, this is really interesting, actually. That one of the things that makes teams function better, and actually the reality is most of us are in multiple teams now. We're not in one team, we're in 5 teams. We're in that global team that we play a bit of a part, and we're in this development team. We've all got multiple teams. But one of the things that predicts whether our team is high functioning or not is whether the team believes it's able to learn. And one of the things that you discover is that actually in big global multinational organizations, it goes without saying that people think they are disempowered from learning. They're not allowed to learn. They're meant to just implement what's going on. In fact, all of the upside that comes from being in an effective team seems to be lost when you're in a multinational. Really interesting. Anyway, I'm obsessed with team cohesion, what makes teams feel more cohesive. And look, simple things seem to be the most effective. And taking time to eat lunch together, or to take time to talk to each other, or if you're in a virtual team, making sure that everyone in the team also has, whether it's once a month or once every 6 weeks, a check-in with every other part of that team, just the two of them. Anything that builds team cohesion, I think, is the big difference. One of the phrases we often hear is that AI is going to rehumanize work. And I think understanding what that looks like is really critical, and making sure that we lean into that. So, if AI does bring efficiencies, the things that remain, the differentiators, are the soft parts of work. And making sure we're taking advantage of them seems to be really critical.
Thank you very much, Bruce. That's all my questions. Really enjoyed talking with you today.
Great. Always love doing stuff with HR Zone. So, fabulous to talk to you.